My name is Christina Sanchez. I teach at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you so much to the organizers and to Bart Landis for inviting me, and it's been just such a thrill to be here for the last 2 days. What I'm going to introduce the panelists very briefly once again and remind you what their talks were about, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and conversation about this event, American Indians in Show Business, how the Carlisle Indian School influenced the entertainment world yesterday and today. We have the 1491s over here. Can we get a big round of applause for them? Thank you. And our speakers, I think Mr. John Sanchez is not with us, but we have most of the speakers so far, so I'll introduce them in the order in which they spoke beginning yesterday morning. We have Jack Lee, Jackie Ferris-Segal, her talk yesterday morning was entitled Performing and Visualizing Indianness. Mr. Larry Sellers, who gave the keynote address yesterday, titled Humanizing the Dehumanized. Mrs. Grace Slaughter, whose talk was about Richard Davis, A Glimpse of a Civilized Life. Kate Buford, whose talk was about Jim Thorpe's 1930s Hollywood years. Clyde Ellis, $5 a week to the regular Indians, show exhibitions and the culture of Indian dancing, 1880 to 1930s. And we ended with Linda Wagner right here, Lillian Sancerre as Red Wing, the extraordinary life of a Native American performer, artist, and activist. And then this morning, we began with Sammy Harmon with the trail from Carlisle to Hollywood. There. And then David Thomason, how the West was spun. And lastly, Jesse Wente just talked to us about the Indigenous New Wave, not your Hollywood Indian. So without further ado, I will open up the conversation to a general comment, either to the panelists, you didn't have a chance to ask questions yesterday, or to everyone else. My question for you to think about is, where do we go from here? And as we listen to these panels, as we maybe browse through the collection, to the Carlisle collections, as we talk to each other, where do we go from here, and what do we take back into our communities, into our families, into the classrooms, since some of us perhaps will go back into the classroom. So I will stop right here and open it up for comments first and questions. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I actually have a question for my fellow conference attendees, because we haven't had that much of a chance to chat. And so I just was wondering what you might be taking away from this conference, what you learned, what might have moved you, just what has it been for you to have been here for these 2 days?
My name is Chip Passo. I'm from Medina, Wisconsin. My bride of 36 years is Native American descent. And so for a white person who grew up in this country, it's been a real eye-opener. And I think the challenge is, how in the hell are you going to get the general public anywhere close to this? Where do you start?
I think that was my question too, and it was kind of neat for me to hear Jess at the end talking about what's going on in film, Indigenous film, and just the sense of it being such a powerful medium, and the kind of enthusiasm he had about how storytelling in a traditional narrative of culture is mixed up with things like whether it's zombies or the streets or sci-fi or fantasy. That you can still sell tickets and get people in the door at the same time. you're not, you know, abandoning something ancient and important.
Is there any potential parallel with the Afro-American experience in film for the indigenous people in terms of the pieces that have been produced, roots, etc.?
Well, yeah, there's more of them, as Sterling just said. I mean, I think, you know, it's difficult to conflate the two histories because they're really divergent, right? So, you know, the Black history in the States, they were brought here, and the difference is we were already here. And so their experience of colonialism is vastly different. And so our relationship with cinema is, you know, Hollywood didn't make movies about slaves. They made movies about their West, and of course that was all about nation building, right? Like the Westerns were an act of nation building. At the time, America was still defining its national story, and all cultures have a national story. You know, and so the Western was a part of that, and they rather conveniently left out blacks because they didn't want to confront that either, and it was more important that they distanced themselves from the indigenous people because that actually allowed them to show manifest destiny and how this was all meant to be, and to eliminate all of that. So I think they're somewhat different. A movie like Real Engine has been made about black representation. I'm not forgetting. Yeah, there you go. So Real Engine is actually just one of several. They've done one about Asians. They've done one about gay, lesbian, and transgender people and representation. So we're getting, yeah, exactly. So that we've seen all those sorts of topics discussed, but it's the indigenous experience is unique here. You know, it's apart from the other ethnic minorities just because of our long history and the way we experience colonialism as opposed to the way they did. And so, yeah, I think there's slight differences. For me, a good starting point would be to get rid of the Redskins name, to be honest with you, because it's so fucking stupid, and that it does prevent us from getting to other things that are vastly more important to way more people. And so I think correcting that sort of language and all of that, and I would start with Redskins, by the way, I would Chiefs, all that stuff, I would give it out. And then once we've actually done that, maybe we can actually move on to have a somewhat larger dialogue, because instead we're fighting about nonsense. And that's impeding us from getting to actual real issues. So like, Native women are dying on a nearly daily basis in Canada. And yet we're start talking about why we have a football team called the Eskimos. And that is really incredibly frustrating as an Indigenous person. And so I think until we can get the overculture to understand that they have to stop that nonsense, only then can we actually have proper dialogue. And you know, until issues of representation, until they stop making movies like Avatar, or at least adjust the narratives of Avatar, or the fact that Disney, the world's largest entertainment corporation, thought it wise to make a Lone Ranger movie, until all of that is gone, I think it's a real challenge for us to get there, which is why the work that these guys do, why a lot of the work that all the people here do is so important, because it's trying to push back against those things and get those narratives out of it, so we can actually deal with the real issues of colonialism. Those are just byproducts of colonialism. But you know, the fact that my people still live in developmentally world conditions in the north, that's a real thing that we actually have to solve. The fact that there's not running water on my res that's a different issue. And until we actually push those sorts of things aside, I think it's a challenge, which is why I feel it's important to champion Indigenous filmmakers who aren't involved in that sort of cycle and get those films ultimately seen and out there. And why festivals have been so important for people to see that. We're an Imaginative Festival, which is an all-Indigenous film festival, the world's largest, happening in Toronto in just a couple of weeks. And I think those sorts of things, you know, once those sorts of films populate, then maybe we can move on. But the nonsense, you know, it's 2014. We need to like really get a grip and you know, move on beyond some of the silliness to actually get to some important ultimately issues. And quite frankly, like the representation in movies, I'm sick of talking about it. I've spent 20 years now talking about why John Ford was an asshole, and it's like, I'm really sick of, I'm sort of over that part of the dialogue, and I'd rather move on to discuss other things. And I think the problem is, the overculture is still stuck wanting to talk those issues through. Indigenous people are, maybe I'm speaking for everyone here, but I think we're sort of,
I'm over it.
yeah, we're over having that conversation.
I was just going to add that, to speak to the point of how do we get out to the rest of the world. I'm not Indigenous, but hearing the 1491s last night and seeing how humor might get part of this message across, it seemed like you guys are really on the cutting edge. And if you could humanize some of these things, and John Stewart's picking you up, you could change the whole dialogue.
We have foreskin t-shirts for sale.
We have t-shirts called Foreskins for sale that you can all buy. This is all real.
How do you spell the four?
Pull it up on the... Totally serious though. Go to what website? Son? I forget. Anyone that's interested in a foreskin t-shirt, come up to us afterwards and we'll show you what it is. Decolonize your penis.
Is that the answer you were looking for?
We didn't really get to talk to Jesse after the presentation, but I wanted to thank him for starting with Alanis Obomsawin and Merita Minta, the two inspirations for me and every other person that does anything that has to do with film and cinema. Because both of them, to be around them and to be in their presence, they're just like a beacon of light of what what we're all on this journey for. The first time I met Alanis was at the Sundance Film Festival, and she was showing a doc there. And she's just like the most graceful woman you've ever met, and smart. And there's things that she just talked about. I listened to a panel she was on. There's things she talked about that I still incorporate and use today. And then, she also has fun. She was dancing on a bar that night. So she was dancing on a table, actually. And so, she's a great woman. And then Merita was actually, an actual mentor of mine where we worked together a lot. And she drove me across New Zealand together. And we had a lot of turkey legs on this two-lane highway in New Zealand. But, it was a person that was just a person that I always think of when I think of how hard it is to get films funded or to wonder if anyone gives a shit, It's Merita's sort of voice, I feel like, in the back of my head that I listen to. Because one thing that I really like about this presentation too is it was about Indigenous filmmakers, where there's a constant conversation going on between all of us, whether it's Maori filmmakers or First Nations filmmakers in Canada or Australian, or there's a conversation that's always going on because we're all alone where we're at. It's not like I live in some hub of there's like a lot of filmmakers I can hang out with and share ideas with. I try not to go to his town, but so we only meet up at film festivals, and we have, and our films begin talking to each other, I believe, where our work gets better because of each other, and that's something that's really exciting. So so thanks, Jesse, that was really great. Mado.
I would like to address him directly because I've been an audience member for the most part. I'm kind of sitting in here for Dr. Lou White, who's leading efforts to create a heritage center on the grounds of the Carlisle Barracks. Again, I'm going to come back to Jesse with saying, for a long time it was there's this history they want to tell, and it's the colonial history, and all of a sudden people are saying, wait a second, we're still here. We have our own story that we want to tell. And so we're trying to do that with the farmhouse effort. We have a great group of people working on it. I provide some technical assistance, and I'm sitting here because Luke couldn't be here today, but that's something that I think is changing in this museum society and white society, all of a sudden people are, instead of saying, we want to pretend you're not here anymore, that you don't exist, and we're going to tell the story of 1791 in the Carlisle barracks. There is sort of this opening that people are starting to say, okay, we might be willing to allow you to tell your own story here. And I think that's really important.
And Alana, for people who don't know much about the Carlisle Indian school farmhouse, can you say a few things about that?
This has been about a 2-year effort. About 2 years ago, the U.S. Army announced plans to, I don't even think this is on. They announced plans to demolish the original farmhouse, which we saw. Richard Davis and his family lived in when he was a dairyman, but students also at Carlisle lived there, particularly the agricultural outing students. So Dr. Llewellyn White, who is a professor of First Peoples at Concordia University, started a public campaign to try to convince the Army to stay the demolition. And that was successful. We received news this year. Demolition's been permanently stayed, and we're currently meeting with the Army. It's going to take a long time. Plans to develop that into a site for descendants' voices. And that is a big change for the Army, and also here in Carlisle, that descendants' voices would be given priority.
And there's a brochure.
Yes, I have.
I just wanted to add just a small aside. Suzanne Harjo et al. Versus football is a descendant of Richard Davis.
Yes. Can you please come over here to the mic?
My name is Michael Collins, and I'm a volunteer here at the Cumberland County Historical Society. We all know that Australia and the United States are more similar than not. Their own indigenous people are the Aborigines. I was curious, does our natives find any relationship with their struggles in basically the same atmosphere and environment that we have found?
I can say that I showed a short film that traveled to Australia to an Aboriginal Film Festival, and it was a film that's called Good Night Irene. It all takes place at IHS and an Indian health clinic, and it's kind of a comment. It's about 3 generations talking to each other, but it's also sort of this funny comment about how bad this Indian healthcare is, and they have to wait all day to see the doctor. And I showed it in Australia, and it was like I told a story from their towns, like they could relate to the humor was exactly the same, and the experience of waiting in these clinics was exactly the same. So I think there are a lot of similarities.
In Tasmania, we actually got a message that these Aboriginal people found a lot of similarities in our humor and could identify with the shit that we were joking about, and so they showed our videos, a collection of our videos at a gallery in Tasmania, which if you don't know where Tasmania is, or thought that it wasn't a real place, it's down in that area.
So since all of our content is on
YouTube, we get a massive amount of information and demographics based off of who's watching our stuff. And so there's a lot of people from Australia, there's a lot of people from New Zealand, a lot of people from Canada. It's those pockets that he's talking about during his presentation. We can actually see that reflected. Our content is making it there. So I think that the humor is analogous, and hopefully, like she said, it breaks down a lot of barriers and makes stuff palatable for people to digest, but sometimes it's a little hard.
Great, thank you.
I also want to add that the similarities in the boarding school movement among those continents and cultures, not just the boarding school movement, but also the lost generation of children, what the Indian Child Welfare Act did to take children away from families and remove them from culture is another very important similarity. Bringing it back to the Carlisle story, if anybody has ever seen the Rabbit-Proof Fence movie, well, that same movie would be Carlisle, and the Rabbit-Proof Fence would be the railroad tracks, because that's how kids ran away and escaped from this experiment.
And Margaret Jacobs has written a book about that, right? And what is the name of it? Margaret Jacobs.
I think it's White Mother to a Dark Race.
White Mother to a Dark Race, comparing Carlisle and boarding schools here to Australia.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you all for being here, for what you've brought to us. It's been an honor to meet all of you. It's been my honor to meet all of you. Some of you I knew before. Some I've seen your work, and there's just been a whole shitload of information. I couldn't think of any other way to phrase it. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honor, and even the staff here, you know, I've gotten a couple things from, because my great-grandfather went here, Kingsley nephew, and they told me a couple things about him and a couple things about my grandfather's uncle, who actually is younger than him because it's the way it worked, but Inagawa also went here too. And I didn't know that until like this week when Barb sent me something about all the Senecas. I said, well, maybe if I just take out Seneca and put Cherokee there, I can find all the Cherokees. And
You figured it out.
I'm so quick. I'm only a computer programmer, you know. And it's just been an absolute pleasure, the discussions that we've been having, you know, that we've had with you guys, and the information you guys have brought. It's just, I want to thank you all for being here and doing that. And it's been an absolute wonderful weekend. And I look forward to seeing you guys down the road somewhere. Hallelujah.
Fill out one of those blue forms, survey forms, fill out an evaluation.
Oh, yeah. Do they have evaluation forms? And it's really important that you fill these out because it lets the people who are funding this see what a difference this makes. And with that, they can continue to have things like this. And so it's real, they have them and they have more out on the desk. So it's like really important that we fill these out and let them know what this has meant for us and how it has affected us, you know, what our thoughts on this, so that we can continue.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have 2 responses to the lady over there. It's my second time attending the conference, and the last one was so informational. This one too. It reminded me so much of home. I'm originally South African, and everything you basically went through, we went through as well. To the 49ers, we have a Noah, which is also very 4091ers. Oh, we have a Noah.
49ers lose.
We have a Noah that's also doing exactly what you did. So I could really identify with you last night. Also, I think putting these things over into movies is important to inform the YouTube. So my question basically was, how do we get this information into the schools basically?
I think there are many ways. I know there's some of the audience here who are teachers. One of the things, and this is just one project of many, but at Dickinson we are digitizing all of the materials related to the Carlisle Indian School, including all of the student files that are housed in the National Archives online. So if you go to Carlisle Indian, all small case, one word, .org, we have an interactive digital website. It will soon be interactive. It's not so interactive actually at the moment. But all the files are going up. We decided that we would make it public as we were still scanning and also providing the metadata. We'd also really appreciate feedback from people in terms of the ways in which it may be useful. We had a small teaching workshop here at Dickinson last summer, and we're going to be applying for an NEH also for probably summer 2017 or 2018, which is also the anniversary of the closing of the Carlisle Indian School. So trying to make the materials much more available across the country, so for those who aren't able to travel all the way to DC or to the Beinecke at Yale, that those materials will be open and accessible, searchable. I think also it's really important in terms of sharing the stories, and I think the farmhouse too eventually is hoping to be a site of memory, and not only a site of memory, speaking of the historical past, this connects also with 50s talk too, but thinking about sort of moving forward, it also really connects, I think, with Debbie's story, of the kinds of stories that we need to share. In fact, Debbie might want to even talk about the buffalo ship and how it needs time.
Do you want me to talk about buffalo?
I think you should, but we are, yes, right after this. So we are interested actually in ultimately thinking about collecting also oral histories. And I think the farmhouse may be an amazing site, a sacred site in which to do that. But Debbie has this wonderful metaphor.
It's not mine.
Buffy St. Marie.
I have something else.
Gracie has something to say.
I'm next.
She's been waiting. I'm not the best.
I'll let her tell the story, but I'm holding the feather. I'm a librarian in my professional life. Retired right now, but I'll be a librarian until the day I die. But in the past few years, I've been connected with the American Indian Library Association, and also on the American Indian Library Association committee that selects award-winning books about Indians for Indian children. And our focus is by Indian authors. We want to have our voice telling the stories. And we also want Indian artists doing the artwork as well. Like the Caldecott has taken, like the Coretta Scott King Award has focused on promoting Indian, African authors and illustrators. We want to promote Indian authors and illustrators until this next go around will be Indian illustrators, but in the past it has not. But we want all of that because we want our story being told, our images out there. We want these for the children because it starts from a very young age, telling the stories and letting them know the voice of our people.
Monty Chesawala, can you hear me? Monty Chesawala was a wonderful Osage woman, and she was a curator of Osage Museum for many years, and she told me Indians see colors differently than others. Now, I'm not saying all, but you better know my sister and I see colors entirely different. So I think that pertains to what you're talking about. If you have the Indian artist to do the painting, it's going to be an Indian artist color.
It's now time to talk about shit.
Why did I get
Alice, because you had a very powerful way of telling it.
No, it's a story that I'm just trying to figure out how it applies right now, but I'm like functionally extinct and my brain's not working. But the Buffy St. Marie tells the story about, how do we move forward when we're up against something individual? How do we, Jesse spoke with, I think, and Sterling, that we're so over going to a certain level of beating your head against that, so we're back to that level, we're talking about. So how do we move through that, and how do we deal with this kind of information? And what Buffy said was, which I think is just a pretty great example, she said that something like this is really like buffalo shit, that what do we do with it? That buffalo shit if it's too soon and you try to deal with it, it's really not helpful. It has no real purpose except if I'm made Indian and I pick it up, you know, that's what you remember about me. And if you're not, if you're white and you pick it up, or whoever you are, and you pick it up, that's what will be remembered about you. But if we give it time, it's a fuel, you know. And I think all this history we're talking about, this, you know, colonial history. The wonderful thing in Jesse's talk this afternoon that really hit me was the idea that when you see things like Deadlands, you know, this is a place that's actually made it to post-colonial. You know, here in this hemisphere, we hear post-colonial. My answer is sort of like with the Gandhis, it's a good idea, you know, and that we're not there yet. But it's time to like recover some of the same territory and push it to the next step. You know, now we use it as fuel. That's the history, and I don't want to talk about the searchers anymore. I saw that one slide come up, it's like, not Joan Wayne, not the searchers, you know. But you know, I know that someone in this room will get a call to talk about it in the next 6 months. And I hope it's you, Jesse. Because, you know, it sounds like you get the good, you can say no nicely. So, you know, so I think it's the idea that like all of this stuff is fuel, and if we're not going to use it, I mean, let's just make something else, you know, let's go to a new fuel source. But right now, it's time to this. It was too soon to talk about it for all we couldn't do without like shooting each other or rifle wrestling. And now it's time to use it. You know, we just can't keep deconstructing it and chatting about it. It's time for whatever our different ways are.
One thing about the schools, though, you know, for example, in Canada, at the University of Toronto, which has a very large cinema studies program, that's where I went to school, they don't teach at an Arjois, even though I would suggest that it's the best, greatest movie in Canadian history. They don't teach it at all. They don't teach any Indigenous cinema. And so when you ask us, like, how do we get this into schools, I might turn that around and say, well, it can't all be up to us, because, you know, it would be, so for example, if the idea is how can we make more Indigenous movies, if the answer is, well, you need an Indigenous studio head, that's really hard. And you know, so for example, in my position now at TIFF, you know, I'm the curator of the year-round programming. I'm in charge of the year-round programming. Is that what it takes to actually get Indigenous cinema in a movie theater? That the guy running the theater has to be an Indigenous person? That is putting a really big mountain in front of these issues. So I think the reality is, just like the lesbian, gay, and transgender community needed the larger community to finally come to grips with that they're people too, and they have all the same rights, and that we're now seeing a grand change in terms of that perception of the laws and all that. We actually need the same thing. I don't think it can all be incumbent on Indigenous people to overcome all of these obstacles. So if we want it in the curriculum, it can't be that every teacher then has to be an Indigenous person, because that isn't going to happen. So what we actually need is some sort of cooperation where we all understand that this is vital. And some of that is the recognition that history in this place did not start in 1492, as these guys' names suggest. It had started way before that. And all of that knowledge, which is now largely rejected, has to actually be brought back in. And that's going to be this is going to be a tough road to go down. Because what I would ask is that everyone really has to reconsider literally everything in their life. And all the whole world we currently live in is all set up post 1492. And this continent was working pretty good before that. And now we're in a heap load of trouble in a lot of areas. You know, in Canada, they've got this thing called the tar sands in Alberta, which is probably the single largest environmental disaster in human history, and the government is sanctioning it. And the only people fighting against it are Indigenous people. And the reality is that if we're going to solve those issues, that can't just be the reality. Just like it wasn't up to lesbian and gay, you know, they had to start the walk down that path, but they needed someone to hold their hand up ultimately and help them get over. And we need the same sort of assistance. So, you know, while I think it's a valuable idea to say, yeah, this needs to be taught in schools, it's very difficult for the people up on this panel to say that we're actually going to be able to achieve that without some assistance. And so We really need that sort of momentum to take place. And I would say the good news is, you know, the Redskins name will change. I wish it would change tomorrow, but it will. The tide of history will ultimately weigh out. I think what we're saying is maybe we could move it a little bit along, but we do need some help. You know, I think to put it all on people who have been have 400 some odd years of history of being, well, genocide against them, and say, well, now why can't you teach us? Really? Like, that's a very difficult position to put us in. And I think ultimately these sorts of things are great, because I think what we hope is that out of this, more ambassadors for this sort of thought are outside of the community and get it. So what I need is the professor of Cinema 101 in U of T, without me having to be the guest speaker, to actually teach at an RG. That's what I actually need to have happen.
There are some more tactics available, and one of the side effects that we saw when we started making our videos is that a lot of teachers started bringing our content into the classroom, and that was an unintentional side effect, whether it be for teaching or whatever. And whether it be indigenous teachers that are bringing in this content that they use to kind of weaponize their curriculum or whatever. If you look at the white teachers too, so if you look at the giant scheme of things, you have all this content that Jesse was talking about for the last 100 years is produced by non-Indians that involve Indians, and all the content he's talking about creates this space. And when you're talking about the internet, everything on the internet works off of aggregates and these formulas and stuff. And so the more indigenous content, original indigenous content that gets pushed up onto the internet, it starts to tip the scale. So the places that house the content that we want people to see, they compete in a more even platform than the stuff that we don't want them to see. And so when a teacher who knows absolutely nothing needs to put together something about Indians, and they go on to Google and they type in Native American, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, just to see what happens, that scale slowly starts to tip as more Native news organizations become, kind of take up a larger bandwidth on the internet. There's short films, just all these other different media components, visual images, photographers, stuff like that, that really starts to tip those scales within the Google algorithm systems. And so when people, if they're in a state of complete and absolute ignorance, they're more likely now, today, to find something that we actually want them to see, as opposed to only being bombarded by things that we don't want them to see, which are exactly like what he's talking about, the Indian mascot stuff, which pretty much functions as a advertising campaign against all Indians at every level, between professional, college, and high school. So national campaigns, regional campaigns, and local campaigns, where those Indian mascots function to suppress all actual indigenous identity at every single level, and they're completely embedded in the community. When we go after that one at the top, and you slowly start to extract that stuff, then we can start talking about the stuff that's in those movies, so that that conversation moves forward instead of, like he's saying, I'm sick and tired of talking about representation stuff. I've been doing this for like 10 years now, and I've only been out of college for 10 years, so it's stupid.
Linda. I wanted to talk about the Redskins issue in a word I normally don't say, but I was there at the symposium, at the Racist Stereotypes Symposium, which is at the National Museum of the American Indian last year as a speaker. And what has changed that nobody's talking about was that symposium. That symposium was streamed live. There was like, at one point, they were like, oh, we got 1 million hits. It was streamed all over the world. And it was being filmed, so you can still access those films. When that happened, Suzanne Harto's been working on that case since 1992. That's when they first filed it. When that thing happened, that's when things changed. That's why we're even talking about it now. And it's social media, it's the live streaming, it's pop culture. It gets into pop culture. It gets on Jon Stewart. It's laws. Those are the things that make the changes. It's not like you're saying the Indigenous teacher teaching it in his class or anybody. It's when it's out in the mainstream, and that's why these guys are powerful, because they're making these YouTube videos that are watched all over the world. I think that issue is very important, like you're saying. It may seem trivial, but it's ironic that we're sitting here where all of that issue actually began. The Redskins name came out of Carlisle, came out of the Carlisle football team. It was, that word was put out by sports writers. They coined that term from the red man that were here. And then of course this was the summer, what do you call it, training gown. So until that law gets passed, which, I mean, the appeal's up, right? They're doing it right now. They're going through the second appeal. Until they pass the law, and even before the law, I think that whole thing is shifting. But that's all social media and being able to stream, you know, and reach a lot of people and make it popular.
An earlier question that I think I kind of like to respond to and tie into this. One is, how do we get it into schools? And I really don't think that's any of our responsibilities to get it into schools. I don't know if any of you are educators or teachers or administrators, but it has to be up to you. Even as parents of school-age children or even university kids, young adults, it's your responsibility to push for it. You know, and the unfortunate thing is that we have to change some of our own people's mentality too. You know, we have people in our communities who still want to promote that colonial mentality because they're afraid. How do we do that? How do we change that? And I think some of the filmmakers and some of the comedians up here, I think, are extremely necessary in getting that done. You know, I mean, and also in our efforts, you know, I think rather than Washington Redskins, why don't you call them Washington White guys? You know, out in just north of Denver, there used to be there's a small community companies up there, and they have a intramural team, and they call themselves a bunch of Indian guys. They call them the Fighting Whiteys, and it's great. But unfortunately, every redneck in America has sent for their T-shirt because it's become simple for them. I mean, they meant it as an insult, but you know, every redneck took it as a compliment. So, you know, we really have to be conscious of how we make a change. We really have to be conscious of, you know, in the efforts that we may intend well, and we may do different things, but what are the ramifications of these things? So it's really important that we get the communities your support in doing these things. You know, it's like these young men look at young filmmakers and these other filmmakers up here. You know, they need help in fundraising and stuff. I'm not saying open up your pocketbook, but you know people who, you know, just give me a blank check.
Just make sure.
And honest in there. I'll leave some money in there.
Finder's fee.
Yeah, I'll leave you $44. And a bag of beads, so. But I think in doing that and searching for these finances and stuff, you know, we need all you guys' support. So, you know, if you could promote these guys, promote these artists. You know, my time is over. It's these guys now. And I'd like to see all of them succeed. I'd like to see them all make it big in whatever they're doing. You know, I tell my son, I've done what I'm supposed to do in life, in moving things and being sort of an activist or an actor, a stuntman, or an educator or a historian. My time is over. It's your time now. But everybody wants to put the responsibility on us. We need to do what we need to do. You also need to take part and participate.
The doc message. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Stephen Osborne. I'm German and Kickapoo, adopted Osage and Lakota. My auntie Larry, I traveled here with him. I didn't know what to have for expectations when I walked through these doors when I first got here. I come in and I talked to Dad at night at the motel, and I looked at these two pictures on the wall. And the thing I seen a lot of grief. I didn't see a smile. I seen a heartfelt ache in those pictures. But today, when I stand here, I feel like those spirits, those Wanagis that are still here, they can kind of see that their memory is being remembered in a good way, that they've helped pave the way for the Native people in a positive manner to do something, and that we're honoring that memory in a good way. I think it's important that we remember them too, and continue to remember them, as well as we think about making these movies, as well, doing this in a good way. It takes remembering those people that made this possible. Their sacrifice, what they give up, is what brought us here today. I might not have a lot of Native genealogy, but what I do have takes precedence in my life. As my auntie said, it's us young guys, it's our responsibility to stand up today and to lead. Our children are coming up behind us. My children, my son is 11 years old, and he's made that commitment to walk with that pipe. 3 months ago, when I was healing from cancer surgery, when I was finishing my radiation in the spring, my son came and he said, "Dad, I've seen the health of that pipe rot, and I want to make that commitment to grow up that way. I want to pick that up." So that's how I think that we can carry this on in a good way. And you asked what I took away from here, and I took away a degree of inner peace spiritually, knowing that their memory is going to be carried on in a good way, and I think that's very important in a traditional perspective. My auntie, he's impacted my life in a great degree. I met him about the time I decided to sober up, and then when I become a father was the first time I met him. And I've tried to make it a point to help him in whatever way I could, because I know that our time is coming. You know, Ryan, you guys, we're all younger guys, you know, like you're doing with your comedy. It's wonderful to have that balance, that balance to things, you know. And I think that it's very important. But I just wanted to thank you all from the middle of my heart for everything that you've done here for us, for having that degree of honesty about things, and I wanted to say about that. God bless you.
Other questions or comments?
I'm sorry that I missed the 2012 session. I'm Bobby. I'm his bride, and I'm half a mighty Indian from Wisconsin. I didn't really know I was Indian when I was little, and what I thought I would, when I found out I was Indian, what I learned was what I saw on TV. Okay, so there's not much I know about it. I'm learning. I'm like a little baby taking baby steps. And here I am at 61, you know, learning this. I'm proud of who I am. I used to be prejudiced of myself because of my Indian. Because, you know, they're dirty, savage, filthy. Thank you to everybody here who spoke, and to Barbara Landis for having you all here, and to you guys with your comedy. It is wonderful. I live in a town that mostly has white, middle-class people and very rich people. And I remember meeting a friend of mine at the YMCA, and I hadn't seen her in months, and she said, "Bobby, what are you doing? I don't see you out." "Oh, I'm still running. I'm a runner." She says, "Well, what else have you been doing?" "I've been writing a book. I've been doing research about my Oneida heritage." She goes, "Well, what else?" And I said, "Well, this story about my great-grandmother, she went to Carlisle." And she said, "What's Carlisle?" And I just about died inside. I was like, oh my God, not only did I not know about my heritage or that I was Indian, but she didn't know what happened to, I guess what you're saying, extinct Indians. So I didn't go any further to explain to her. It's going to take things like this to explain to all nationalities what happened. My husband's Italian, and I told Barbie he was part of the Wampadigo tribe. Anyway, but I didn't know when John Sanchez showed that video of Real Engine, and I've seen it 3 times, but today it really clicked. You know, the Italians were hung by Irish people, so he was, treated bad too. And, there's a lady on, our people don't speak English, and it's an Indian documentary. And I've watched it a couple times, and I remember this Indian lady, I can't think of her name, but yes, we're all different colors, but we all bleed red. And that says a lot. I've learned so much from all of you today. I take it with me. I wrote down so much. I feel like a secretary. I'm not going to use it for anything. It's just something for me to carry and up here. I wish I could say more, but I'd be standing here for hours and I'd be divorced from my dear even know. So thank you. That's all I can tell you.
I just want to respond to the keep doing this part of your comment, because we are really, this is an initiative that we took about a year ago when we started planning this, and we would like it to continue. We would like to keep doing it. And, we're learning more and more how important it is, how important voice is. That is certainly our big priority, because we need to be a vehicle for voice. And Carlisle has so many themes that we could talk about: literature, poetry, music, dance, all kinds of themes, photography, the whole acculturation issue, big things, little things. So we've decided that our next conference in 2014 is going to be about sports, because we like to keep to these sexy topics early on, to keep it, exciting and keep it going. And everybody knows about Jim Thorpe, but there are so many Indian athletes who came out of Carlisle, so many. And many of them were Oneida from your nation. So that will be the focus of our conference in 2014 or 2016. And then in 2018, which is the anniversary of the closing of the school, we want to focus on sovereignty issues and the whole pan-tribal movement, which was born out of Carlisle alumni in the Society of American Indians that were founded by Carlos Montezuma and Zingala Shah and Angel Zecora and Chauncey Yellow Robe and, all of those movers and shakers in Indian country who were advocating for Indian citizenship, and was the forerunner to the National Congress of American Indian and of AIM. So, those next, 4 or 6 years are starting to gel in our thoughts, and we really want input from everybody, who has ideas about what different things we need to focus on. Does anybody else here want to speak to that?
I just had to interrupt you for a second. Kate, you wrote that Jim Thorpe book, and you'll probably be here for the Olympic thing.
I hope so.
When my great-grandmother was at Carlisle, story had it in the family that Jim Thorpe used to wave at her every day in the 2nd grade and say hi, or hi, Sophie. You
He
know,
was a friendly guy.
and most of my relatives will say they went to school with Jim Thorpe, even though when they went,
Exactly.
it wasn't
Everybody says that.
It was a nice sugar-coated wig, you know, Carlisle, so remember that when you come.
I'd just like to add something to the Jim Thorpe theme and then something to what we're doing in the future. When I arrived here a week ago, was it a week ago? Maybe not quite that long, and Barb was waiting in the car park for me, and I had to get through Homeland Security, which took over an hour just in the queue. And when I got to give my fingerprints, etc., and the guy said, "What are you here for?" I said, "I'm going to a conference on Indians in Carlisle." He said, what is that about? And I said, "The Carlisle Indian School. Have you heard of the Carlisle Indian School?" And he said, "No, never heard of that. This is generic customs, might not let me in guy." And I said, "Have you heard of Jim Thorpe?" He said, "Well, I've heard of Jim Thorpe." I said, "Well, you've heard of the Carlisle Indian School." And then I gave him a quick potted history with everybody else waiting in the queue of what the Indian School tried to do. And I think probably everybody in this room, I mean, Larry said, you can't do it all, but everybody in this room is, if you like, an ally in this whole process of getting the stories out there, by whatever means, whether we make movies or, like I teach in a college, and I also have children that one of my kids can recite smoke signals by heart, because he came every time I showed it to my students. He loves it, just loves it. So, that was in some ways the beginning of my education, and I think all of us, by supporting the farmhouse venture, by coming to these things, and then just in our everyday interactions, we carry some of the story and take the burden. We can't all make movies and we can take the burden, we can't all crack jokes, but we can take the burden of those people who can, perhaps. So that's why I'm here, and I'm also very committed to returning, and also, I hope, bringing in some more pounds to support this, so I can get my filthy mitts on.
Any more questions or comments?
Can I just make one comment? Because one thing I think when people have just come today, they don't realize that this has been going on, even though this event is new, that this has been going on a long time, this education, and Barb Landis is pretty much the center of it. This is the first time anything's happened here, but it is not the first time. It is over several years that she has been behind educating people about descendants of Carlisle, researchers, like all of us people here do research. We're doing it through Barb, and we're spreading the word through our research and our writings or whatever. So this is not the first time this has happened. It's the first time it's happened in this kind of venue, but people come here every day. They call her every day. She is working herself to the bone all the time, helping people out and educating educators all the time. So I think that is, you want to help her out too.
Oh, no, I just want to say, it's probably 10 years ago when I first came.
Yeah, me too. So it is not new, folks. It is, this is the first time that this has happened, but she needs help. She needs some help. Not anymore. You stay here, everyone.
Thank you for attending. Thank you for your wonderful papers and panels, and please join me in thanking Barbara again for her wonderful work.